Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.
Hello, I'm Lorene Mills. Welcome to Report from Santa Fe. We're filming during the New Mexico legislative session, and our guests today are two men who have their hand on the helm of the ship of state. We'll be having Senator Michael Sanchez, who's the majority floor leader in the Senate. But first, I'm excited to have the Speaker of the House, Representative Don Tripp. Thank you for joining us.
Delighted to be here today. Thank you.
Well, you've been up here for 17 years.
I have.
You're a small business person, a jeweler. You live in Socorro, but your district is
About 17,000 square miles, and that includes Catron County, Socorro County, and a good part of Valencia County.
Wow, and that's District 49.
That's
well,
it.
Thank you. You were the first Republican to be elected Speaker of the House since 1953.
That's correct.
And at the time, I don't know if you know, you were so well regarded by both sides of the aisle. They view you as a statesman, and you've made some wonderful changes. Of course, a lot of them are policy, but in terms of the running of the mechanics of the House, you suggested to the committee chairs that they actually start their meetings at the time they were supposed to start. Some of them would be an hour or so later. And so all of us who follow these things are very grateful to you for that.
Well, it seemed like it's worked well. We tried to be business-like and business-friendly. And if you have a committee, if someone wants to testify, it should start on time. And it's just a matter of saying, we're going to do it and get it done, and we have. So,
Well, in what ways is this session different than last session?
yeah, it's a short session, as you know, and it's primarily a financial session or budgetary. But some of the mechanics change. You know, we haven't had to deal with messages from the governor before because certain items are allowed to be germane during the session, which in a 60-day, everything is germane. So those have been quite interesting. And also we're in a period where there's very little money. The tax revenues are down, and so we have a very flat budget, and so there's a lot of challenges. So.
Well, actually, that was a bit of a bombshell.
Oh, yeah.
Because even in December, the people whose job it is to estimate were saying maybe $262 million, and then in the first week of the session, we found out it's $30 million in extra money.
Yeah.
It's a bombshell. And so how can you cut back? You know, it's not your job as Speaker. The Appropriations Committee in the House and Senate Finance in the Senate will gnaw these
Sure.
requests down.
And actually, both committees are working very hard. They work well together. Senator Smith in Senate Finance and Larry Larrañaga, who's the chairman of House Appropriations. But starting out, they had a $70 million Medicaid hurdle to cross, and they had $30 million of new money, so they were immediately $40 million underwater. And so you start looking where you can find money, different funds, anything that they can sweep to try to put in the budget to make it all work. So.
I remember hearing John Arthur Smith, Senator Smith, say on the floor, he's saying, giving notice to all you agencies, I'm looking for cuts in your present budget, not just for next year.
That's right. That's right.
And that just, it's very hard. You think enter a fiscal year thinking you have so much money, and now at the end they're going to kind of claw it back a little bit. But it's very interesting to me, your experience in all these 17 years here, but also as a small businessman, what the root of all of these problems that we're going to talk about is the economy. So based on your own business experience and your lawmaker experience, what do we need to do? What would you suggest that we do to help shore up the economy?
Well, you've heard the comment, it's the economy, stupid.
Yep.
And that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
You know, if we raise the basic economic possibilities for the people in New Mexico, it would alleviate a lot of the negatives. A lot of the problems we have, the lists that are bad, we're at the top of. The good list, we're at the bottom. If you raise the economic opportunity, it would start to change those in a meaningful way. So we need to focus on
Well,
that.
last year you had a bill that I was really interested in. It was called LEDA, the Local Economic Development Act. And just tell us briefly what that is and how it's been helping.
Right. The LEDA Act is, like you say, local economic development, but it's what they call a closing fund. And so if we can attract a business from out of state, we can use that fund to pay for part of the infrastructure, maybe sewer lines, maybe paving, parking lots, to try to attract that company and then benefit on the other end. But it's called a closing fund. All the states have one now. And frankly, before we had ours, we were really at a disadvantage. But we were able to put $50 million in that. And that was during the last session. Money was tight then, but it was absolutely the right thing to do.
Now, what do you see personally as the main problems facing New Mexico?
It's primarily the different underlying things. We need an educated workforce, but it's almost chicken and the egg. Until you have the jobs, it's hard to know how to train people. So we're trying to deploy a rapid training course at some of the universities to where we can train people in an accelerated manner rather than having them spend 2 years in school. Well, we also do things that's very important to the state of New Mexico, and that's broadband. Everything around New Mexico, if you do not have broadband in this day and age, you're at a disadvantage. You can get people that can come to New Mexico, live in our wonderful climate, a beautiful state, and run their business back in Cincinnati or somewhere when it's snowing. And if they have proper internet, if they have broadband, they can function. And those are called solo jobs. But they're economic-based jobs because money comes from outside into the state, and that's what's important.
But so we are faced weekly with these horrible statistics that we're the worst run state, the worst in child poverty, the worst in child hunger, the worst economy that hasn't bounced back from the recession. So, and it is a chicken and egg thing. So is the bad economy the root of it? Is that why we have so much poverty and all? It's layered and layered and layered. But what is being done this session to address those problems?
Well, we have several initiatives, and you're absolutely right. We need to move forward, but we can't just sit there and say that's the way it is. We've got to try to do things. JTIP, we have implant training money that's recommended in the budget. We have training of actually the hospitality industry, the tourism, to have that frontline employee actually talk to a tourist, say, well, have you been to this monument? Have you been here? Have you been there? It's kind of added value. And I think you need all those steps in order to crank the economy up just a little bit more and more every day. So it's not easy, but we got to keep pushing.
I know, especially in this grim financial climate. You had a wonderful editorial, I think, that appeared in all the papers around the state, saying it's time to put aside political games and to get to work on issues that matter to New Mexicans. We're filming at about the halfway point, but it seems to be a lot less partisanship than last year. Are you going to be able to keep the partisanship down to a dull roar?
You're always going to have the partisanship. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. But you have to get past that and be able to talk to people, after the floor sessions. I'm a friend of Michael Sanchez. He and I share a district in Belen. And I saw him at the Matans on Saturday, and we visited a little bit about what we need to be doing going forward. And we will be working on these issues because we all want to solve it. We all want the economy to improve. We want to be safe in our homes. And so we will be addressing them. And everything doesn't get solved the first year, but you got to keep just working at it. So.
Well, here's the eternal return of the driver's license real ID situation. I think the will of the people is to handle it, whether it's two-tiered, whether it's whatever. I think the people are really tired of worrying about real ID and will they be able to fly. Right. I think there was kind of a disinformation campaign scaring people around the holidays. You won't be able to fly to see Grandma unless we have this real ID. It turned out for 2 more years you can fly, but the TSA has said that, Homeland Security has said that. We had our congresswoman on 2 weeks ago saying it's okay, but still people are worried about it. So that is one thing I think the public is anxious to see. And I think there'll be competing bills in the House and Senate, and I'm sure there'll be a good compromise that gets that taken care of once and for all.
It should be, and it's a three-legged stool. We need the House, the Senate, and the governor's office. Yeah. We kind of have 2 of the legs that agree with one another, and if the Senate comes along and will help us figure out a compromise, I think we can solve the issue.
Good. Another thing that I in my talking to people is very important, the whole thing about ethics.
Mm-hmm.
And you had the unhappy duty of calling, by law, you had to call the impeachment committee.
Right.
And I'm sure you had to do a lot of thinking about that. Tell us some of your thoughts. This is when the Secretary of State, Diana Duran,
Right.
was accused of, 65 felonies.
Sure.
And then there was a plea deal. Well, go ahead. You tell us what it was like to choose a committee.
It was one of those times where I didn't care for my job a lot, but kind of hurt my heart, but it was necessary. When the charges came down, we have a duty to investigate the charges. And so at that point, I'm required to appoint an impeachment committee. And it's more of an investigation committee because impeachment the committee doesn't impeach.
Yeah.
It would be the House, but the committee investigates. We appropriate the money, we name the members, and they started the process. And as it came out, there was a plea deal where the committee has been dissolved. But it's one of those things that you never want to get there, but sometimes you're forced into it. I was on the previous impeachment committee, and so I had a little taste.
Who was the impeachee?
It was for Jerome Block Jr.
Ah.
And so I sat on that one. And it's something that you need to do because you need to govern yourselves.
So wouldn't an ethics commission help us? We're only one of 7 states
Sure.
that don't have this.
No.
And why I like it, we're almost out of time, is that it educates people who don't understand,
Sure.
as well as punishing people who do wrong. But if you've got a body you can go to and say, does this look bad? Advise me. That's really important.
And we do have a bill. Representative Dines of Albuquerque has introduced a bill. It's gone through. It's actually a joint resolution, so a constitutional amendment. And it's gone through the first committee. It had some problems, but the committee wanted it to move on, so they voted unanimously to move it on. There were some real loopholes in it that they really hadn't thought of, and that happens with so many bills. But I think it's very important with an ethics bill that you get it right if you can the first time.
Yeah. And
because people are sitting in judgment, you don't want it abused and used for political gain during elections and that sort of thing. And you're dealing with people's reputations.
Just in 30 seconds, can you tell us what people should look for in the next 2 weeks as the Senate ramps up?
I think
as the legislature ramps up.
A lot of camaraderie. There'll be a lot of debate on the floor of the House and the Senate. But I think out of the session, we'll get a balanced budget and we'll get a fix to the driver's license issue. Well,
Speaker Tripp, I'm so grateful to you. Thank you for joining us today on Report from Santa Fe, and thank you for the work you do for New Mexico.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here.
And now we're joined by Senator Michael Sanchez, who is the majority floor leader in the New Mexico Senate. He's been in the Senate for 23 years. He came up in 1993, and he represents District 29, Valencia, and Bernalillo counties. Welcome, Senator Sanchez.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you having me here today.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. You serve on some your role as Senate Majority Floor Leader is so important, but I think sometimes it's misunderstood. Could you tell us what the Senate Majority Floor Leader's job is?
Well, I'll do my best. Part of my job is to make sure that the floor is run properly, that we have the proper etiquette and the discipline in the chambers, and that we don't have any debates that get out of hand. The other function that I serve is I refer bills to different committees, and we have a policy and a procedure in terms of how those bills are actually sent to committee. I don't just look at a bill and say, well, it's going to go to this committee or that committee. Health bills go to public affairs. Bills that have financial impacts go to finance. Bills that have penalties go to judiciary. And so we've been doing it that way long before I was the majority floor leader, and I follow that tradition that we've done. And sometimes people like it, and other times people don't appreciate it. But there's a process that we use to send bills to committee.
And I'm very familiar with that process, and sometimes it amuses me to think that people think that you are some kind of wizard, like at Harry Potter's Hogwarts, where the sorting hat is sorting these bills into Gryffindor or Slytherin or finance or public affairs. There's really a method to your madness, and I have seen other heads of committees stand up and say, I don't think we need this bill in conservation, or
Yes.
and send it back,
Right.
take off a referral. And someone else from another committee might say, I think we need to see this
Sure.
in public affairs or something.
A lot of times, bills could go to all of our committees, as a matter of fact, and we have to be very judicious in terms of what committees we send them to make sure that those committees and the subject matter of the bills are appropriate. But most of our bills could go to every single committee if we wanted them to, but we don't do it that way.
Right, you just boil it down to the essentials.
Absolutely.
So that's one area of misinformation that has troubled me. Another one is the whole thing about one of the hot potatoes of the session, but the New Mexico driver's licenses and the real ID.
Yes, there is a lot of misinformation about that subject matter.
Well, we've had Congresswoman Michelle Lujan Grisham on here speaking for the TSA and Homeland Security, saying we've got 2 years. You can fly domestically.
Right.
The small little percentage of New Mexicans that are affected are people who have to go onto a high clearance military base.
That's
and that's
correct.
not most people.
Well, what we tried to do was to tell people the truth, and because there was so much misinformation being given out by the fourth floor and a certain newspaper that were telling the people of New Mexico they had to get a passport by January 10th of 2016 or they would not be allowed to fly. We knew from our conversations with Homeland Security that that was not correct, that they were going to give us more time, and we tried to get that information out, but for some reason we could not get the press to pick it up. And when the newspaper was corrected, they didn't appreciate it very much and really didn't spread the word or the truth. And so, again, we tried our best. We knew it wasn't going to happen that way. I feel bad for anybody who went out and got a passport as a result
Or who
of the
stood outside in the winter in long lines, paid all that money.
Yeah, and they really didn't need to do that. It's a shame that they had to go through that.
Well, we would love, as New Mexicans, to put this chapter to rest. I know last year your colleagues, Senator Smith and Senator Ingle, had a pretty darn good bill to address this problem.
Yes.
Are we going to solve it this session?
Well, that's another thing that people weren't aware of. People weren't aware that we passed a bipartisan bill led by Senator Stuart Ingle, a Republican from Portales, and Senator John Arthur Smith, a Democrat from Deming, and that it passed our Senate 35-5, and the House refused to hear that bill. It's too bad that the public really didn't get that information. I've been trying to tell people who are calling me up now that we did pass it last year, and when they find out that the House really didn't do anything, they're a little upset when they find that out. I will tell you, we will get it solved this session. Probably as we speak, there is a committee meeting, and they are going over the House bill that was presented, House Bill 99. I believe that Senator Ingle and Senator Smith are going to have an amendment to that bill that looks similar to the bill that they proposed last year. It's going to be a little different, but we think if the House is willing to work with us a little bit, that we will get it done, and the people of New Mexico won't have to worry about this anymore, and we can forget about it and just say it was something that happened to us that we didn't like, and let's move forward and get to the business that we really need to be getting to in this budgetary session.
Yes, well, that was my next topic, because we all kind of went into sticker shock when in December we were told there were $262 million in new dollars, and then 1 month later,
Right.
it's been adjusted down to $30 million. How are you and how is the Senate dealing with this? Really a shock to the system.
Well, that amount, that projection was always, we weren't real sure of it from the beginning. And then when the oil and gas prices, natural gas prices started to go down, we became very concerned about those revenue estimates. You're right, it's about 30, maybe 20 million right now in new money. And that's why I think we're acting very responsibly in terms of the bills that are coming over from the House. They have sent us a quandary of bills that deal with crime and punishment. And we're going to have to pay for, if we pass those pieces of legislation, we're going to have to pay for new prisons, the amount of people going into prisons. And the sad news is none of those bills have any type of rehabilitation or treatment attached to them. And that's something we should be thinking about. But the Senate generally acts responsibly, and we want to know what the cost is going to be if we're going to start incarcerating individuals.
One of the things I've liked about your approach is that you really can sort which is cause and which is effect. Now, perhaps all the crime and all these issues are the effect of some really underlying problems that we have that I've heard you address, are issues with poverty and education. Could you speak to that?
Well, we've been trying for years to get into the permanent fund for early childhood education. And there's a lot of us who truly believe that if we would put money on the front end and help people, young people, children, be healthy, they would learn more, they would go through school, they'd be able to read, they'd graduate from high school, and they wouldn't be in that school to penitentiary pipeline that exists. And so we're working on that. The underlying issues that have always affected New Mexico, which have always bothered me, and the legislature or no administration has ever addressed it, is the drug and alcohol problems that we have here. We talk about treatment, we talk about rehabilitation, but we don't put any money into those types of programs. And I honestly believe if we had done this 10, 20 years ago, we wouldn't have the same type of problem we have today.
And look what's happened to New Mexico's behavioral health system.
It is a shame what happened and what this administration did to the behavioral health system. A lot of people who needed help weren't able to get it, and now a lot of those individuals are probably serving time in penitentiaries as a result of not getting the help they needed.
Well, they're a very vulnerable population, and that was very grievous what happened. I hope we can ever build it back up. Another issue that you work very hard on is jobs and the economy, because clearly, oh my God, our statistics are so brutal. We're the worst economy in the Southwest, the highest unemployment rate, the worst run state. I mean, every week it's another leading in child hunger, child poverty, these ghastly statistics. You did mention, if we can talk about this briefly, the governor gave a State of the State talk that was painted a very rosy picture. You had a press release afterward, and you pointed out, can you just briefly tell me what you said?
Well, I do believe she's living in a parallel world, because that isn't what's happening in New Mexico. You just stated all the facts, the bad facts that we are going through.
Yeah.
And I will just say, up to this point in this legislature, we have not had any messages from the governor that deal with the economy, job growth. We have a package that the Senate, different senators have, but we can't get messages on any of them because the governor, for whatever reason, has decided she wants to take this legislative session a different direction. But it's a shame, because New Mexicans are struggling, people are looking for jobs, families are hurting, and her call for right to work isn't the answer to get the economy started. Right to work is the wrong answer for New Mexico. It's anti-worker, it's anti-family, and any states that have that type of legislation, their jobs decrease, the benefits they receive are lower, and their safety in the workplace is less, and they work for a lot less money than they do in states that don't have it. So it's just really strange session in terms of, it's a budgetary session. We're last in job growth, all the things you cited, but this administration and this governor have not tried to put down messages that might help our economy grow, especially at this crucial stage.
It's been called the Groundhog Day session because a lot of these same issues are being trotted out that, haven't been solved. And right to work Don't we only have like 5 to 7% of our workforce is unionized?
I believe it's 7%.
And so the right to work is not really going to affect many people. But be that as it may, we just have a couple of minutes left.
Sure.
I'd love to hear what your vision for New Mexico is. You've been here all these years and you've watched, the tide come in, the tide go out. Talk to me about how you see a vision for our New Mexico.
My vision is for every child to grow up healthy, to every child to be educated, for every child who gets into adulthood becomes a good, strong citizen of this state that supports our state, goes to college, starts a business or works for a good business in our state, and produces, raises their family, and understands the value of who we are as New Mexicans and the land of enchantment that we truly are. This is the greatest state in the country, bar none. I don't care what anybody says or what anybody would criticize us for. We have the greatest people. We have our diversity is unique, and we need our students to stay here, the best and the brightest, and to make us even better than we are today.
Well, that is a vision that I find that most of our audience will subscribe to. I'd like to thank you. Our guest today is Senator Michael Sanchez, Majority Floor Leader in the New Mexico Senate. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the time.
And I'd also like to thank our other guest, Speaker of the House, John Tripp. He joined us earlier. You both share an inspiring vision for us in New Mexico.
And let me just say something about Representative Tripp. He's one of the nicest gentlemen I've ever met. He's a good legislator, and we work well together on issues that we can agree on. And we can agree to disagree and not be mad at one another. So he's really a special person.
And that is the area, that is my vision for New Mexico, where we have bipartisan work on solving all of our problems.
Well, I'm working on that, and let's hope the House helps us a little bit.
Thank you, Senator Sanchez.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank you, our audience, for being with us today on Report from Santa Fe. We'll see you next week.
Past archival programs of Report from Santa Fe are available at the website reportfromsantafe.com. If you have questions or comments, please email info@reportfromsantafe.com. Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.